Hi, everybody. I'm Dan.
And I'm Mike.
So welcome to 15-Minute Film Fanatics. This is the podcast where Mike and I watch movies separately and don't discuss them until we get to the podcast. Today, we're going to be doing Fitzcarraldo, the 1982 great movie by Werner Herzog. And this is a shout out to our listener, Tim in Michigan, who suggested that we do this movie. In part one, we always talk about our initial takes. Both of us saw it last night for the first time. Mike, go.
You know what this movie reminded me of that I loved?
What?
I felt in a weird way that it's almost an adaptation of Invitation to a Beheading. It's about a person who's trapped in their own idea, right? He's full of Gnostical turpitude, and so he's cast out of the society, and he sails, but he's imprisoned on that tiny ship, and he's just in prison the whole time to show them how unreal their reality is, and that he lives in the only real reality. And I felt like the last moment of Invitation to Beheading, like the last paragraph, is just as triumphant as the final moment that we'll talk about at the ending.
Now, for those of you who might not know, Invitation to a Beheading is a great novel by Vladimir Nabokov, and it's kind of his version of Before Orwell. But it's this terrible dystopia where Cincinnatus, the lead character, is different from everybody else, but he's different, and we're on his side. And he's different because he realizes that all the people around him are empty and shallow and things like that, which is kind of what goes on with Fitzcarraldo.
And I think that one thing that drew my attention to it is that the capitalists in this movie in Peru are almost comically evil. When the guy tosses his wad to the fish, which I think is fantastic when they kick him out of the party and they say that they're going to send him through the kitchen, lets him drink all the toasts. There's something about overcoming, but I don't mean overcoming in the Michael Jordan sense. This movie is very not The Last Dance or something, where you see a person achieve something.
You don't get
great.
to see him lay the first foundations for the opera house. He doesn't get near the opera house.
So this is about the spiritual rewards of greatness, or the nebulous thing that art is, right? That there's this is not my moment, so I'm stealing an extra moment, but there's the scene where all of the indigenous people come out on their canoes and they all join him, and they join the voyage, and nobody can explain why. It's just that art is a structure. And so there's certain people that will reject it and they push them away, and there's certain people, like a force, that converge on it inexplicably. And that's what it is. It's a coming together of inexplicable things, but without any sort of practical reality and without any practical reward. And that's why the movie has to end when it ends. It's one of the very few movies that defies a hard and fast rule that I have, that movies should be a certain length. But I really understand why this movie has to be as long as it is, and why structurally it has to make you feel the way that you feel when you're watching it. It's both incredibly engaging and incredibly long. And it was a joy and a struggle to watch.
Yeah, you don't really have that hard and fast rule about length, because you'll watch any movie of any length as long as it's
I like
good.
Lawrence of Arabia, but for the same reason.
Yeah,
I love Lawrence of Arabia, actually.
And it's funny you said because this is one of the things I thought seeing it was, this is a big movie, right? Now, I'll often say to someone, I'm sure you use this expression, do you have to turn this into an opera? Like, don't turn this into an opera, right? And what we mean by that is, of course, opera is, of course, like operatic, right? It's larger than life. It's better than life. Of course, if only people really did walk around singing like Caruso all day. And he says in the beginning, it gives expression to our greatest feelings, or our deepest feelings, right? That's what art is. That's what opera is. This movie's not about opera. It's about art and what art does for us. And so when the people in the Andes say, like, a white god in a secret boat will show them a land without sorrow. That's what art is. Even though terrible things can happen in art, it's this land without sorrow, because the artistic world, like you said, for Nabokov, is better than our world. And he sees a glimpse of that, and he wants to transform that world into that. And it's hard to do. The other thing you just reminded me of is that he's kind of like, I saw Fitzcarraldo as kind of like the love child of three great literary figures, right? He's Kurtz from Heart of Darkness, right? I'm going to go into the Heart of Darkness. I'm going to bring the light of this great thing, bearing the torch of opera. He's going to put Caruso literally on the end of the boat and play it, right? He's also like Ahab, right? He's monomaniacal. I love when they're all saying, like, why are you going against the current? Why are you going up and when the pilot's saying that, it's just like Starbuck asking Ahab and Moby Dick, like, why are you doing this, right? And he's also, of course, Don Quixote. When you're trying to drag a boat over land, there's something very, quixotic about that.
There's a beautiful moment when the first canoe of indigenous people floats out from inside the Amazon. They don't know what to do. And they see him and they don't know what to do. And what's interesting about that is that the camera stays on the canoe, even though you hear the dialogue behind, and even though sometimes the ropes themselves will drift in front of the camera before they come back. And it struck me that even down to the structural or shot level, that this movie was about fixation. And that if you stay fixated, things move out of your way. The vision becomes a structure, or the things that you can see become a structure, just like he gets a crew out of nowhere, just like they're able to take a ship over land. And I was really impressed by that shot, although that's another moment that I'm stealing. But I just thought that was gorgeous, right? Because the triviality of their discussion of what to do is totally sublimated into just not taking the camera off of them and trying to figure out what the situation is. Their whole being is pointed in one direction, and that's the best way to describe Fitzcarraldo.
Yeah, the film and the man, right? Because he's fixated on this idea, right? That everyone laughs at him. First, he was going to make the railway, right? And then now he's selling ice to make ends meet. But I love it. What you just reminded me of is when he goes to see the missionaries, and one of them says, he says, well, how are they doing? And he says, we can't seem to cure them, the indigenous people. We can't seem to cure them of the idea that our everyday life is only an illusion behind which lies the reality of dreams. And Fitzcarraldo says, I'm very interested in those ideas. I specialize in opera myself. So again, like, our everyday life is only an illusion. It's not real. Your dreams are real. And do you remember why the captain gets hired? Remember how the captain sells himself? He said, he says, I can tell the difference between reality and hallucination on the river, right? He says, the river's full of lies and demons and illusions. I know the difference. But of course, the joke of that is that Fitzcarraldo knows the difference, because he knows that this world is just it's nothing. It's just dross. It's that there's when you listen to Caruso, right? You are transported to a better place, and you are in aesthetic rapture, and that's why you'll row your boat for 2 days and get blood on your hands and break in just to hear him sing. And I think that if you like art, as I know you do, as you know I do, and I don't mean visual art, I mean like all like literature and film, like that's what it's like. Like that's what it's like you would do those things to feel, to be in the presence of something that great that you really can't articulate to someone else. I think that Herzog does a great job of dramatizing that feeling.
And I think that the introductory section to the film is just annoying enough, because what it has to prove is that when you feel that way, it's not without consequence, and part of the consequence is to make you a pariah, right? That's what I mean by an invitation to beheading.
Yeah,
because you don't fit in with anybody else anymore, and you're stamped by it and you're marked by it, such that you couldn't drink at the same party as somebody who didn't feel the same way.
Yeah, and he even looks different. I mean, boy, does he ever look different, right? Klaus Kinski, he could not.
He glows.
Yeah, he's like Tom Wolfe walking around in the Peru. Everything about him looks different, but of course you can't take your eyes off him. All those scenes of him staring and his totally like blue eyes, like you can't look at anything else. And he sticks out physically, but he sticks out like spiritually and morally among all those people. That's why when he does it, when the guy says at the party, when he tries to play Caruso and he says, the guy who cooks for the dog will get you something. And he starts doing all the drinks like, to your dog chef, to Rossini, to Caruso, you're on his side, aren't you? Like, you're proud of him for doing that.
Absolutely. He's making a spectacle of himself, but he's ridiculing how funny it is that they should all be standing around, because what they're saying is once they can get him out of the way, then the party can start. But he's the only real person at the party.
He's the only real person at the party because he believes in something that they all see as silly and trivial. So welcome back. In part two, we like to talk about a moment that really struck us or grabbed us as we watched the film. Mike, what was yours?
I thought the whole set piece with the umbrella floating down the river from the peoples in the trees. And I think that at that point in the film, you're supposed to understand that there's a kind of religious conversion going on, right? That somebody is bringing their vision to a place where there is no vision, and that it's either going to light a torch or it's going to be snuffed out. And so a couple of things. First, what I just said about fixation is also true of the shot of the umbrella. It's exactly like watching the guy ride towards you to the well
Lawrence of Arabia.
in Lawrence of Arabia, just waiting and waiting and waiting. And by the way, how beautifully shot is this film? I wasn't prepared for it. No, I don't know what aspect ratio that is. I don't know how that effect is achieved, but it has all the things that I like visually, including the overdubbing into clackety shoes and the sounds of water, which that I love.
You're a sucker for that.
But it's a perfect symbol of society, because it's something that should not be in the jungle, right? It's not a head, it's not a shoe, it's not a hat, right? It's not a body. It's far more ominous than that. What it says is, what you send upriver to us, we will send back downriver where it belongs. And that's kind of the spiritual dissonance of the whole movie. And of course, it doesn't go that way, because what he does is he's able to overimpose his vision, right? He the contrast to the drums and the hollering and the implied threat is he plays Caruso's. He says, now it's Caruso's turn, which summons the crew, which again, it summons the ensemble for his opera cast, which I just think is so utterly beautiful and structurally beautiful. That 5 minutes where you see the umbrella coming and he plays Caruso, and then the people gather and they're on the boat together, that will give you the whole film in miniature. I think it's a perfect little synecdoche of everything that happens.
And to the film's credit, it doesn't stop there, because you watch him I think your relationship with him, with Fitzcarraldo, is very much like your relationship with Ahab. Is that there's parts where he's very admirable, but there's parts where he's kind of horrifying, like when the two guys die, and because they get run over, and that's like a moment of triumph for him. My moment was when we see the winch getting tighter and tighter as the boat's being dragged over the rocks, and I made a joke to myself, but this joke actually opened up the more I thought about it into what we said in part one. Here was my joke. So you have to fill the viewers in. You ready? You have to view them in. So I've been trying to get Mike to read this book for 2 years. What book have I been trying to get you to read?
Bob the Gambler.
But it's just a novel I thought was funny, and I know what Mike likes to read. So I'm watching it and I make a joke to myself and I go, man, this is like trying to get Mike to read Bob the Gambler, right? So I thought to myself as I'm watching, haha, and I keep watching it. But then I started thinking about that urge we have as readers, because you've done it to me too. Like, you've gotten me to read Our Mutual Friend. I know it's one of your favorite books. Like, why do you think we are so insistent? I want to ask you this question first about getting our friends and people whose taste we share and whose opinions we share. Why are we so insistent about getting them to read the books we like and see the movies we like?
2 reasons. I think first, we don't want to be, in a sense, left behind by our own elevation. Right. When you ascend, right, you don't want to be the only one who ascends. You want people to ascend with you, right, so that you're not lonesome. And I also think, especially with regards to art, there's something where I wish that I could go back and read Our Mutual Friend for the first time,
right?
But I can't, and so I need the canvas of your mind to do it.
Yeah, which is why it's so much fun. Like, when I would text you, And like, oh, I just got to the part where they got to this, and you're like, oh, wait till this, it's gonna get crazier, and like, oh, all the stuff. So that's great. Yeah, I totally agree. And I thought to myself, like, that's what he's doing on a massive scale. Like he's like, I like Caruso, and you're gonna like Caruso, and you've got to like Caruso, and you've got to like opera, right? And I think that like loving a book or loving a record by Caruso, it's kind of like being in love. Like you want it affirmed by other people. Like Fitzcarraldo is the super fan. Like he's the guy who's in love. He's not in love with Claudia Cardinale. He's in love with Caruso. He's in love with art. He's in love with opera, and he's convinced beyond all discussion and all rationality that like opera will make the world a better place. It will turn the jungle into a place of beauty. Like when he goes, when he sees Caruso, who does he say Caruso is singing to? Him, remember? He's like, he was looking right at me. He was like, he has, now we don't know that. Like he looked at him in his direction, right? But he has this moment where Caruso locks eyes with him. And I think that, he says it's the dreamers who move mountains, but I think that the movie dramatizes on a mass scale this feeling we get when we really, really love a work of art and want to share it with other people. And it's hard because if they don't read the book, it's like dragging a boat. Or if you give someone a movie to watch and they say, yeah, it was okay. And you're like, what do you mean? Like if you told someone to see Fitzcarraldo and like, I don't know, it was all right, you'd be like upset, right? If it was somebody whose opinion you've respected. And it's kind of funny, like that's what he's trying to do on a massive scale.
And I think that is dramatized in the scene where he refuses to go home. He refuses to go to the brothel, and he spends time at home on his bed on the deck, surrounded by the kids who are playing with the ice, right? He's rolling over in bed, surrounded by his many children, listening to the Caruso record.
Yeah, because he knows that like he's been touched by it, and he has all the zeal, of the converted to try to bring this word, to the jungle and cranking it right on the air of the record. And of course, things don't work out entirely, but maybe we'll see what happens at the end when we do the ending. It's funny. I looked at a thing before we recorded today. It was a transcript with Herzog on NPR, and at the end of the interview, he was talking about his memoirs about the making of this film, and she made a comment. The interviewer made a comment. I think it was Terry Gross said something to the effect of, this film actually drove him crazy, and he said, actually, I was the only sane one involved in the whole production.
Which is it's funny if you know Werner Herzog or you pay attention to him, but. The artistic vision and what we've been saying is that it is a form of hyper sanity, right? It's when you see what's clearly in front of you and everybody else is walking around in a mirage. One of you has to be insane, and it's not you. It's not really that art drives you crazy. It's that art makes you hyper sane, beyond sanity, and everybody who's merely sane is living in a dream world.
Yeah, and that's why there's a part where they talk about he says at one point, Fitzcarraldo says, "Sir, the reality of your world is nothing more than a rotten caricature of great opera." And that's what the world is to Fitzcarraldo. It's a rotten caricature, a bad, exaggerated imitation of what the real world is, which exists behind this world, which goes back to that thing about the missionaries.
Right. You may think he's crazy to turn until his hands bleed, but if you can see what he can see, you have the same reaction, which is they're only hands.
Right. But I can go hear Caruso.
Okay, welcome back. So in part 3, of course, we always talk about the ending or the title or the key takeaways. I think we are fixated enough on Fitzcarraldo to understand where the title's coming from as our larger than life character. So Dan, what do you have for the ending?
The ending is so good because talk about being able to have your cake as a director and eat it too. I mean, he gets everything. You don't build the opera house, but you get that great moment of triumph. He's like, bring me your best cigar. And he actually brings them over in the ship. And what I love about the ending is one of the last things he says is when he tells that story about Niagara Falls. Remember the story he tells about Niagara Falls? He says there was this trapper from Montreal who was the first person to go see Niagara Falls from Canada. And he comes back and he says, there's these unbelievable falls there. Like, you're not going to believe them. I can't even describe how big they are. And someone says, well, what proof do you have? And he says, my proof is that I've seen them. And he says, well, I don't know what that has to do with me, but that has everything to do with him, because that's what it's like to be a great artist. The proof is I've seen this thing, and you try to realize that thing you've seen onto film. And that's what great directors do. Like Herzog had to take this vision he had about this story based upon this true story of this guy who tried to build the opera house and turn that into, this thing called Fitzcarraldo. And that's what all great directors do, right? Orson Welles and Mankiewicz had this idea, we're going to make this movie. Remember, I don't know if you remember, the original title of Citizen Kane was American. And they were going to make this large in life thing. And sometimes that works. And sometimes, like we've seen with Heaven's Gate or something, sometimes it might not work. But the ending is so great because he doesn't realize his vision of building the opera house, but he does realize his aesthetic triumph, like we said, of getting other people to share in the joy of what he feels when he listens to opera.
Yeah, I mean, the cliche about why people climb mountains.
Yeah, because it's there. Yeah.
Right. And art is the inverse, because it's not. Right. And it's not unless I make it so, right? Because what he says to the guy when he's getting kicked out of the party is, he says, I will outnumber you, which proves to be true. He says, I will outrubber you, which is true. And he says, and I will bring the opera to Quito, which is true.
Which is true. Yeah, which is true.
And so it's the fulfillment of everything. And I think that's why we're made to enjoy it, but you have to enjoy it apart from all practical reality, right? If there's somebody, let's say you're watching the movie with a Philistine, the Philistine cannot enjoy the movie from the sense that he's gotten rich, and so he has achieved his goal, right? And that's the structural problem that leads to getting your cake and eat it too, which is, how can you win but lose?
Right. Well, he sells the boat back so he's not going to become, the opera house is never getting built. But he has that moment, and that's that great moment. That's why it works that he's in the red velvet chair, he's in his throne, and he's smoking the cigar, and the last shots of him smiling while he listens to that music. So it's, the guy that he sells the boat back to, who fed the money to the fish, is never going to get it. Like, he totally wouldn't get what this movie's about, because he can't. He's less than human. I don't know if that sounds too harsh, but in the world of this film, he is less than a complete person.
Well, he's made to express the obvious, but with glee, right? When you first are introduced to him and he's sitting at the table and waving Fitzcarraldo over, he says, how glorious the sensation of losing money, which is, of course, why people sit at the poker table, but nobody says that, right? He's like a Popeye cartoon of an evil person, but it totally works. Yeah,
it totally works. So, and then what did you make of the ending of him bringing everyone, doing the pilgrim and singing that in that moment? Like, what did you feel or think when you were watching that ending?
To him, opera is the epitome of civilization. And so what he is a civilizer. That's why he wants to bring, right, the opera house to Peru. And he wants to build something which lasts longer than people, right? So what's the eternity of art? It's not just the sensation that you experience when it's there. It's the monument to art that remains, right? All the people that built the Sydney Opera House are dead. But if you see the image on a postcard, you know exactly where you are. And so what he wants to do is put Iquitos on the map.
Yeah, like Horace said, art, life is short, but art is long. So thanks for listening, everybody. We hope you enjoyed our conversation about Fitzcarraldo. Great film. You can follow us on Twitter at 15MINFilm, or you can also follow us on
Letterboxd
and let us know what to watch next. All right. You might have seen the theme so far in this year's movies or this season's movies, but we're going to keep this theme going. See you next time.